Today we will be discussing World War III, the Clash of Civilizations. I'm Hermioni, a partner at the Geopolitical Forum, and I'll be interviewing Eric Mao, the founding partner of the Geopolitical Forum, where he will be discussing differences between China and the United States as they relate to each other and their security policies. So I'm going to lead you through a series of questions, and we're going to have a discussion. How does that sound?
That's great.
Perfect. So I know you've been doing a lot of research on both countries and on both of their goals. So my first question for you is, what are the United States' global strategic goals?
Like the political slogan goes, America first. So in a sentence, it's just make America remain the world's number one economy, number one military, number one everything, essentially. And also on top of that, has to do with the domestic politics, because the current administration, namely the President Donald Trump, he always blamed the previous administration, not just Biden administration, previous administrations, for how America ended up here as it is now. So he wanted to bring America back to America first.
Yeah, make America great again.
Exactly, again, so that implies it's kind of sliding down. It's not that great anymore, but still not too late to save it. So he's the Messiah to come here and save it for American people, for American history. So he wants to a certain position in American history, even world history. That's what he wants for America, and that supposedly represents a certain section, big or small, of the population's mentality they want for America. So a lot of things goes into it, because you want to bring America back, and you blame the previous administrations, not just one of the previous decades, and you bring how the ally taking advantage of you. So it comes into a lot of policies like the worldwide tariff war, and internally there are a lot of things go back to meritocracy, the anti-woke thing. There's a lot of things comes to it. Also, you identify a peer adversary, which is China, and what you do with China. So all comes to wanted to bring America back to the top, and how you think America ended up where it is right now. So that's why we see what's happening in the world, that what Trump administration is doing around the world, mainly the tariffs, the trade, and the war and the conflicts.
So you would say that Trump, in your opinion, has sort of, there's three categories, right? The first is the tariff wars. The second is the culture wars, in terms of like, you know, being anti-woke, I guess, for the sake of a better term. And then the third would be like waging, you know, different conflict, different wars around the world.
Yeah, he adamantly thinks that America was taken advantage of, not only by the adversaries, but by their own allies. So he put out the blanket tariff war for everybody. And internally, the cultural war, the most prominent example is the Defense Department. Now they changed the War Department. Mm-hmm. That also shows their posture toward the world. Defense Department has the secretary telling all the generals, high officials in the Defense Department to change their ways. Right? You have to work out. You have to get trim, get better physique.
And there's nothing wrong with working out.
And he fired. Well, for the secretary to lecture the generals and the colonels in public, it's kind of weird, right? And also he fired the LGBTQ kind of commanders and generals or transgender people, all that stuff. So that's internally, and also it's military. So it reflects on their standing in the world, especially America as the mainland military, as the military budget of the total sum of the next 7 countries. And the third one is the war, right? They go out to the world. And actually that really caught me off guard because when I read the document, the National Security Strategy document published in early December, it did not show that it will do something that big. Because it's all the document, you get the impression that we are, United States, we're kind of retreating from being world hegemon to a regional hegemon. We want to be regional hegemon, namely Western Hemisphere, but at the same time, we do not allow another hegemon in the world. So we're not the only world hegemon, but we allow multipolar world. Actually, Rubio kind of spoke about that early in his tenure. So they acknowledge there's another one or two. United States is no longer the only hegemon in the world. But at the same time, you see a little contradiction there. In the document, it says it does not allow any other hegemon in the world, not even regional hegemon.
Interesting.
So there's a contradiction in logic. So I thought at least they had a little contradiction internally. They want to retreat, but they don't want to say it out loud right at this moment. But I totally didn't see it coming, which is the running into characters to abduct the president and going into Iran in such a big way. So that tells me kind of the mentality, the way the brain works in the administration, and how they treat the document. They want to initially. I think they wouldn't want to lie in a document like that because it will defeat the purpose.
It may be, but I would speculate that like they're not also going to China as well, right, or any major power. They're not going to reveal like their true, secrets in that document. That document is more of like a statement of intent or a statement of like a really broad strokes thinking. I don't think they're not signing a contract to not attack anyone. I don't think it's precluding them from doing what they did.
You're right. Because you can call it a little naive to believe that they will be truthful with the document. Because my thinking was, it's a declaration to the world and to your own people, to your own country, and to your own administration. So everybody's on the same page. Whether you like it or not, you know what they're doing. So there will be no surprises, so easier to do certain things, easier to communicate as things are happening. But you're right, now I realize that there's a different layer.
Because I think, like, from just what I've been following on the news, social media, I think a lot of the original MAGA supporters, probably for the reasons that you're talking about now, they feel kind of betrayed because at least the commentary that I see on X or on YouTube and all those different social media outlets is they're like, this is not what I voted for, this is not America first, right? He said one thing and I was turning around and doing another thing. And it sounds like this document might be along that same.
Yeah, I learned something in this year. Only three months along, I learned a lot. So now next time I read that document, I will read it in a different light. Right. Definitely.
So could both of these events, though, these events of aggression, be somehow related to China?
In my view, yes. I think the Venezuela incident, I think more people acknowledge that it's about China and Russia secondarily. But the Iranian thing is more foggy. But I think it's getting clearer to me it's about China too. And but I think the Iran conflict is multi-purpose. Like it serves Israelis' purpose, their agenda. Trump went along with it, not solely for Israelis' sake. He has his own agenda. So okay, kills two birds or even three birds at one stone. So let's do it. But you can imagine that if just Israel, if it totally doesn't serve U.S. purpose, it's probably not that easy to happen. As in the past, it hasn't happened for a long time. U.S. always hated Iran. Israel always wanted to get rid of Iran's current regime, but it hasn't happened for decades, for a reason. And now, kind of because multipolar world, because China is rising, U.S. is seeking to clip the wing, if you will, in Western Hemisphere, which is Venezuela, Cuba, and in Middle East will be Iran, because China has comprehensive strategic partnership with Iran. Also imported, like 14% of imported oil for China is from Iran. It's a sizable, significant source, whereas Venezuela is only 3%. But Venezuela is more weight because it's in America's neighborhood, sphere influence.
So I guess we would say that the broad strategic goals of the US would be the tariff war, the culture war, and China containment. Let's move on now to China. So let's look at the flip side. What would you say are their strategic goals based on the security document that you read from them?
Yeah, based on that document, now I have to look at a different light, right? As I learned from the US, I don't think China will be any different on that level. When it comes to national security, they have different layers. The lower layer, they won't even tell you. The higher layer, you can find everything there, but you can explain that they don't give you like a detailed implementation, but they will tell you the intention. But even intention, there's a different layer. So China's, my understanding from the document and from the background knowledge that I have, is development, modernization. So modernization by development, because China has been downtrodden for the last 100 years until, let's say, 1990s. From 1990s, before 1990s, China was a mess for over 100 years. And China's been through that before. Throughout history, China has been down and up for 8 years, for 8 times. Depends how you count. China has 20-some dynasties, but not every dynasty changing will be that catastrophic.
Sure.
But the difference between China and other civilizations like Egypt or Babylon or Rome or India, those names, they're down, they never came back. They never came back. But China always came back as one. Like Rome, they split into Eastern Roman Empire, Western Roman Empire. They just struck each other. Okay, we just coexist. And then Western Roman Empire broken down into other European states or kingdoms. Well, okay, well, this is how it is. Maybe there's some revival effort in history, Charlemagne or Napoleon, but they were just a little effort. Their focus really not on the unifying, but they just want to expand their own territory. There's a difference between unified the way it was and expanding your own territory. But China is a different model, entirely different model. I don't know why that is. We can explain. That's a very deep topic. They have different model. When they're broken up in a catastrophe, they always want to come back in one. That's in everybody's mind, in the competing rulers' mind, as well as average people's mind. So that's a totally different model because they have this consensus. So they always came back. It has happened 8 times. Now we're seeing the 9th time, which is the People's Republic of China. Some people observe that the cycle is going faster because shortly after 1949, the founding of the People's Republic of China, that's formerly the country is unified, there's a cultural revolution only 3 decades later. You can look at it as another chaos, catastrophe. Now they're coming back after 10 years in the late 1970s. So the cycle is increasing. So the point is they're coming back up, they're coming back up as one. And so that's their most important thing. That's the only thing all the country that pour their energy in one thing is modernization. Because it's recognized it's falling behind after all the disasters. And so they want to going back to their rightful place.
So so development, they're coming together, there's a lot of would you say there's a lot of like cultural momentum with that, right? Where the sentiment of like the average person is very much, we're all coming up together as one.
Yes, everybody agrees. Because if you're broken out into 2, 3, or 4, in the case of China in the early 1900s, it's broken up into like 7, 8, or 9. But no one can be legitimate if you just settle with, okay, I'm good for being a warlord and part of China. Just like, oh, I'm France and just part of Europe, I'm good with that. You can never be a legitimate by just settle with that. You cannot rest until you become the only one in China.
So do they have in their document, okay, if those are their overarching goals, do they have in their document how they're going to go about achieving them? Like what's their approach?
It's already happened. So it's already happened. Everybody's thinking the same way. Okay, when there's Communist Party was struggling with the KMT, the Civil War, they just want to defeat the other side. And of course, there's a dispute when their KMT was retreating because the situation is turning against them. They're retreating to the south of the Yangtze River. So there's a dispute. There's a debate within the Communist Party, which was already successful in the north. Should we go down across the Yangtze River to totally eliminate that regime, or should we just settle? Like we have a border with KMT along the Yangtze River, right? So that goes against, if they decided that would goes against the tradition. China has to become into one. Of course, they decided against that.
No, I understand. So, okay, they're one right now, but what I mean is, in terms of like the development and the modernization and the unity, what would that mean, right? What does that mean for trade? What does that mean for maybe industrial initiatives inside the country, or I don't know.
Yeah, Deng Xiaoping, he's the one that leading after post-Cultural Revolution rejuvenation of China. He's the one that pushing the China into using the market mechanism, market economy.
Sure.
So market economy is a big thing. It's a huge thing because before that, in the Communist Party is always very doctrinary, ideological, has to be going with Marxism, socialism, with no other deviation or other elements from different ideologies. And even Soviet Union, they kind of moved away from that after Stalinism, Khrushchev and stuff. They criticized Khrushchev and even post-Khrushchev as a revisionist. In China, 2 things that's really bad. You don't want to be called 2 things in the old days. One is if you're called a capitalist, you're pretty much toast, right? And another thing is if you're called a revisionist, you're toast too. So that's those 2 things you don't want. So they were insulting, because when the Soviet Union and China's relationship was sour, they were like insulting each other. Mao was insulting the Soviet Union. The big insult is calling them revisionists. There's a story one time Khrushchev calling Mao on the phone, and that was a story, right? I don't know if it's true. In those days, 1960s, you have this operator. They have to plug the phone.
Right.
The operator will hear the conversation. You tell the operator who you want to talk to. So the operator connect you to the office. The operator even actually lectured whoever they call on behalf of Khrushchev to try to talk to Mao. They lecture them. You're a revisionist. You're not worthy. That sort of thing. So that's a big deal. So market mechanism. They're not afraid to be called revisionists. Of course, there's a lot of work to go into to change people's minds, because you can imagine a lot of resistance. Hey, how can we be what we used to condemn? So you have to change people's minds. Of course, there's the vested interest you have to overcome, and another thing is industry. You have the Chinese model is different from model, let's say, where I grew up, Taiwan. It's from light industry, but the Chinese models start from heavy industry. So another part of this is military. Military, big thing is atomic bomb, nuclear weapons. Because there's always this fear during Korean War. That's shortly after, almost immediately after the founding of the People's Republic of China in Beijing. they immediately had to go to Korea to fight United States, the #1 power, the winner of the World War II, defeating Nazis and Japan. You had to fight them in the battlefield in the Korean Peninsula. And there's always this fear that America will nuke China during that war. One incident that Mao was in the big conference in the people's, it's a big place in Beijing. In the middle of the meeting, he was hosting the meeting, and the aide came to him, whispered to his ear, saying, we got intelligence America was gonna nuke us. So he was still, saying goes, he was not fazed. He still conducted the meeting. So it's always back in their mind, if you cannot really rise without nuclear power. Mm-hmm. So that's in the 60s they had their first the Texas explosion. And so, and then they want to bring the country to, they realize, Deng Xiaoping said, we're socialists. We wouldn't want to be a poor socialist. You cannot be a poor country to be socialist. So we want to build up the economy first, improve people's lives. The first stage is moderately prosperous society. Then their goal is to be in the early 20-teens, but they kind of beat that mid 20-teens, but they achieved that in early 20-teens. And then late around 2020s, they claim they eliminate all the abject poverty in the whole country. So they're in the second stage to exceed that. Now they're really trying not to be stuck in the, what's it called, middle income trap.
Right.
Because a lot of people say, hey, China's that's just another country, it's gonna be stuck in middle income trap. That they're mindful of that too. They try not to be, but in my view, they're not gonna be stuck in that trap. Based on what the trajectory of the country is going and the plan for the future, technology, they're not so they move beyond that first stage, which is moderately prosperous society. So they pay more attention to really quality of life and the environment.
So in their security document, do they call out specific technologies or specific, I don't know, trade strategies or anything that would indicate what they're going to do next, given all the history that we just discussed?
Technology, certain technology, nanotechnology, what's it called, telecommunication, and they outline what's going to be a focus. They also tout what they have already accomplished recently, which is space technology. They went to the space station, they went to the moon, at the other side of the moon. The chip industry, the semiconductor, AI, biochemistry, biotechnology.
Did they, probably not directly, but did they in any way imply anything about Taiwan or anything about the United States?
Yes, Taiwan is a red line. It's a red line. They don't have many red lines in the document, but Taiwan is a red line because China has to come into one. That's the tradition, that's the culture, that's in the DNA. That's also the mission of the Communist Party. So that's a definite red line. So they put it in there so everybody has. So there's no misunderstanding. There's no illusion. Oh, maybe China they're lucid on that. There's no make sure there's no misunderstanding on that part. So in a way, Communist Party kind of created their own monster because they've been educating or brainwashed their people that we're gonna take Taiwan back, incorporate it into the mainland one day. That's our mission. So people had that plus it's a cultural thing, traditional thing. So if you abandon that, it's really bad. You lose your legitimacy. So that's definitely a red line. They will never let go, and they will never give it up, especially when they're strong, especially when they see the U.S. That's how they see it. U.S. is in retreat, U.S. is in decline, time is on their side. So they were going to reach that goal, preferably in peaceful way. But they will never take the military force off the table. Of course, that would be stupid for anybody to do that.
Is there any text or any source that like maybe in Chinese, right, that I can't read and understand, that they clearly articulate that they think that the U.S. is in decline?
Not in the form of that.
Where they like explicitly say it, or is there anything that they allude to or hint at?
Not officially, definitely not. That's too provocative. It doesn't pay to do that. I doubt even Donald Trump. Well, Donald Trump would.
Because Donald Trump will just.
He would say something like that.
He just says stuff.
But it's just Donald Trump. There's only one Donald Trump in the whole world history. So normally people don't do that. Okay, Chinese people are normal people.
I guess I'm just asking because I think people think a lot of things, and whole populations think a lot of things, but then it's what they actually do, or there's, I just think it's easy to say that, oh, the Chinese think that the USA is weak, or vice versa, the USA thinks it, but like that still doesn't reflect the truth, or even the truth of what people think, and I'm just trying to get to like, what does China really think?
Right. That's right. That's what interests me too. That may or may not be the truth, right? Because you can talk about absolute power or relative power. Relative power, of course, you went from one single hegemon to a multipolar world. That's relative power. There's no dispute on that. But absolute power, U.S. economy is still growing. The military is still growing, right? But we're talking about subjectively what Chinese people are thinking, or even Chinese governments thinking. I went to China. That's the thinking on the street. I can tell you that, and I don't see the government will be much different. And also based on their strategy, their policy, international foreign policy, you can see they're conscious, they're aware of the fact that, or their thinking is, the time is on our side. So what does that mean? That means the longer we wait, if we have a showdown or face-off, the farther down it is, the better for us. So that means the time on our side, the relative power, we're rising, they're relative to us, they're going down. Also internationally, you have World Bank or other different economists, their projection is in the future, let's say 2050, China will surpass the US by multitude. And even India will surpass the US in terms of national GDP. So I don't think that's disputable. Even Americans know that. You can see a little hint on that.
I doubt India will pass in terms of GDP per capita. Like it might be in absolute numbers, like total GDP. But I'm very skeptical that they would surpass the United States in GDP per capita.
Right. I kind of what's it called, skeptical on that too. But that's how a lot of people think, see it, how they see it. That's a lot of people. So definitely China will surpass actually PPP parity. What's it called? There's a parity kind of measurement.
Purchasing power parity.
It's already surpassed in 2016. So that's more meaningful than the nominal GDP. And so I think subjectively, a lot of Chinese thinking that way, and also reflecting on China's foreign policy, how they deal with the United States.
So what role then do you think Asia Pacific will play in both the United States and China's global strategies?
So continuing on that, so how do we deal with each other, right? And from U.S. standpoint, they want to have a Cold War. They don't say Cold War. In the whole document, whole United States strategy, you don't see those words Cold War in terms of the current situation. They may refer to Cold War something historically. So that's what the U.S. wants to do to China, but China doesn't want it. It's a Cold War that only has only has one side. China doesn't want to participate. They even condemn that kind of Cold War mentality in their official national security strategy document. So we're not going to play. We're going to fight the Cold War. Cold War is not workable. It doesn't make sense. We're not going to be part of it. So you can see an asymmetry between U.S. U.S. wants to fight Cold War, want to continue. Although it doesn't say that, but everything they do is pointing toward that. But China they say explicitly, we don't want a Cold War. Cold War is not wise. It's not workable. It's not winnable for you guys. And we want cooperation. The world is big enough for both of us. That's China's.
So what's their vision of cooperation?
Trade, investment, technology exchange. It's everything that U.S. is going against. Because you can see a Trump administration, he's going against globalization. In the official document, national security strategy document, it says against that too. They don't believe in globalization anymore, and they don't use the more negative word like decouple. But that goes against globalization. Of course, they don't want to be like it was, as far as with China. Why do they have that mentality? Because when China was rising, in 1980s, 1990s, when they were accepted into WTO, and the U.S.'s calculation is we're going to have China provide us the market, also the cheap labor. They will forever be in that place's lower rung of the industrial world. They will always produce cheap goods with their cheap labor.
Which was, I'm going to interject, very naive and very silly, but
right. That's their. Yeah. Well, at the time, that's the thinking of the time.
Yeah.
At the same time, China will be richer. So you know what people think. When they're richer, they think about their human rights, their democracy. So China will be like us, only poorer, and they will stay there. But it didn't go that way. Gradually, they realized that was naive, like you're saying. So they have this resentment. And we made a mistake. They took advantage of our mistake, and like Deng Xiaoping was a very good PR person. He came into America. He toured America. He had a state visit. He put up a very friendly gesture, and he won the American public's hearts and mind. And Americans were totally comfortable, as well as the American elite, totally comfortable with this Chinese leader and the Chinese Communist Party, their direction.
If the U.S. is clearly taking an anti-globalization stance, and China, according to you, wants more trade, more collaboration, more exchange, etc., why should the U.S. trust them?
Well,
because I don't know, I'm just very obsessed with what people, or not just people, countries or entities, what they say, like their stated beliefs, versus what happens behind closed doors, behind the scenes, that completely undermines what they're saying.
Right. They can go by wait and see, right? You do step by step. If you want to trade, we trade with you. What's not to trust? It's all ideological, or their mindset. They think trade is against us, is for their benefit. To a lot of people, even Americans, they think it's false concept. Trade is a mutual beneficial. Maybe you can talk, have a trade deal. Maybe China has higher tariffs on certain goods, and you can talk. Instead of have a broad brush ideological against globalization, or have a tariff war against the whole world. That's very, it's a very juvenile way of doing the big thing for your country, leading a country, or leading the world, as Americans would think. We're leading the world, we're leading the free world. You can't do it in a juvenile way. So it's not about trust or not. It's not about I give you money and then I let you do whatever. This is a trade. We're watching. Everybody's watching. If something's not good, we'll go back and and we're going to go back to the negotiation table. We can point out, we can sue, brought a case to the International Tribunal or WTO Tribunal. There are a lot of things you can do. It's not about trust. It's about wait and see. About what's it Ronald Reagan say? Verify, trust and verify. Right? You can go with the business, go along with the business. Then we see what happens. But as opposed to what the administration is doing, even started not only the current administration, even Biden administration, they already started doing that. The trade war, well, the first Trump administration started the trade war.
Yeah, and Biden continued.
Biden continued that. So it's not just Trump, it's American. It's American way. So I think it's very, what's it called? It's a very juvenile. It's not mature. It's very immature way of doing things. And militarily, the posture is against China. They try to contain China in the South China Sea and Taiwan Strait. The posture around the world in Western Hemisphere against Cuba and Venezuela, in the Middle East, Iran, all this stuff. So it's a multifaceted, and then the current Cold War is also about the supply chain logistics. So they have their alternative called Pax Silica. Where they have their own alternative supply chain. They invited major countries.
Who has the alternative supply chain?
It's led by U.S. State Department in the 20, I think it's last year, December last year or January this year. They started this initiative, invited countries, major industrial countries, except China. So it's very obvious what the intention is. They don't want to have the reliance. They don't want to rely on China. Although China is crucial for the world supply chain, but the U.S. tried to establish an alternative supply chain to reduce the reliance on China. The goal, the flag is the banner is about AI, but everything about AI, right? You have electric power, you have hardware, software,
Sure.
Fiber optic cable, all the stuff surrounding AI. It's a lot of stuff.
For sure.
From material, from rare earth material to build chips, to build everything. So it's about everything. Although it's called AI related, but silicon, Pax Silicon, but it's about everything around China, because China has they hold the market for that.
I think it goes back to trust though, because even if the U.S. and China were like best friends, because these are such critical technologies, I don't see, at least at face value, why it would be unreasonable to want to have redundant like supply chains and redundant infrastructures in that space. So why would we, and again, I haven't read the security documents and followed this as closely as you, but why would we assume that the United States is doing this out of hostility and not just out of like, hey, we need to cover ourselves, right? We shouldn't only rely on China. We should have alternative ways to get like really critical infrastructure and materials that we need for AI, because we know AI is the thing right now.
Well, that's a good point. But from the Chinese perspective, they call it a Cold War.
Okay.
Yeah, we can call it a
hybrid. It might not be true. It might just be paranoia.
We can call it hybrid war. That's true. That's a good standpoint. And I'm sure that represents a certain part of
it could be paranoia due to, first of all, just paranoia, or even, and maybe mixed with lack of trust. But even like if, let's say I had a nice relationship with my neighbor, and my neighbor was supplying me with like all my groceries, I'd be like, yeah, that's really nice of my neighbor. But at the same time, I would be kind of concerned, like, what if something happens to my neighbor? What if we have an avalanche that like divides my house from my neighbor? I would still want to find other sources of groceries without it necessarily being an act of hostility toward my neighbor.
True. But when you started out with, because the globalization was going very well, it was going smoothly until the first Trump administration, 2018. you started the trade war, right? So when you start a trade war, you would think the other side will go against you because you already started the conflict. So that's when the trust goes down, declines, right? True, they don't have to trust China, especially they started the fight. They think China will take revenge of you. They won't trust you, so why should you trust them? So that's when things start to go down. Of course, now the trust is very minimal. And neither side should trust the other side. If you're a leader of China or US, if you trust the other side, you're not doing your job.
Sure.
Yeah, given that, right? But who started this thing? Precipitate this lack of trust, right? So you have to go to the source to see the context. And China is the one that benefits from globalization. So you can talk to them, have some compromise, so that everybody gets what they want. So no one was like get hit very hard. Everybody has live with a compromise instead of hit with a trade war, and then now we don't have trust to each other.
I still think though it would come, even if there was never a trade war, it would still come to a point where you rip off the Band-Aid. Because if you say, AI is very critical to our infrastructure, at some point, China would maybe stop getting as much business, right? Because the US would say, we want to build our own internal infrastructure because we know it's important for us to be competent in that space and not be fully reliant on someone else. Like I guess I'm just wondering if, trade war or not, that the US wasn't on a trajectory where they were realizing, okay, China's becoming very advanced, very powerful, right, very industrious. And again, with no hostility towards China, we need to think about how to look after ourselves as well. Should there be a geopolitical issue, or should there even be like a natural disaster, like when COVID hit, right? And then, the US realized that they could not get a lot of supplies that they needed because the industrial base is not here anymore.
Yeah, right. So that's what comes back to the topic of today's talk, is the clash of the civilizations, right? Because the different thinking, different way of thinking, different way of operating between civilizations. So from US standpoint, or from the West standpoint, because they share the same civilization, the same source, you should never trust the other side. The Greeks should never trust the Persians, vice versa. Right? That's building.
Well, they gave each other lots of reasons not to trust each other.
Right, of course. The Germans should never trust the French. The Brits should never trust the French, right? The Germans, that sort of thing. That's a Western thing, but that's not a Chinese thing. So Chinese comes to this in good faith. But the U.S. comes to this with a baggage. Well, baggage is a negative word, but with a historical backdrop or background. That's how they do things. If they didn't do this thing the way the civilization mandates, if you will, they're not doing their job. If it comes to the U.S. president, you're not doing the way that the U.S. president or European prime minister way. You're not doing your job because you trust Chinese. You're not going to last very long in your position.
Even if there was a lot of, I think we should move on, but I just still wonder, like, even if there was a lot of love between the U.S. and China, and the U.S. trusted China fully, I still think there would be just a natural paranoia toward wanting to secure infrastructure and competence in AI anyhow, like, because there could be, who knows, like natural unforeseen circumstances where you need to, have redundancy outside of China.
Yes.
But
True. Yeah, so I agree with you that, well, the Cold War also reflected in each government's document, formal document. Like China uses a Cold War, U.S. doesn't. So what you're explaining to me reflects the U.S. mentality. They may not see it as a Cold War. They may see that's a normal way we're doing business, normal way where Westerners do business. But from Chinese perspective, it's uncalled for. I mean, we're not in a fight, you want to fight. But U.S. doesn't think it's a fight. It's just a normal way of doing business.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to get at. That like it might not be, well, in the case of Trump waging tariff wars, it might be hostility, but like I still think if you took them away, the overall American sentiment might not be fully hostility based.
Right, that's what's unique about this conflict of civilizations. Between US and China, the gap between the sides is bigger than cultural gap, a gap of psychology, mentality, bigger than the Cold War between Soviet Union and United States. I would argue they're both from Christianity,
Sure.
Same civilization. They know each other better than the Chinese and the Americans know each other.
Sure. So speaking of Russia, right next to Russia is Europe. What role does Europe play in US's and China's global strategies? I think Europe is taking kind of a different approach than the US, even though it's the Western world.
Yeah, Europe is different today. It's not like Europeans like to see the way it's changed. And actually, at this juncture, what from the at least Trump administration standpoint is they're gonna mediate between Europe and Russia, because the current situation between Europe and Russia is very bad, right? Very tense, very lot of bitterness, and the current war is still not resolved. So the U.S., but what we can see is U.S. getting weaker because of that. They get a lot of trouble economically, and militarily, it's been shown that they cannot stand the challenge of Russia. And what their fear is, well, they're in a contradiction here. If you are not able to match the other side militarily, why don't you have peace with them? So the Europeans, at least the elite, the people in charge, they don't want to be in peace with Russia, but at the same time, they know they cannot match Russia militarily. So they want the U.S. in. U.S. wanted it after the World War I. That's the new world order that U.S. set up. They want it. They want in. They want in. They want to have NATO. So U.S. is a big part of NATO. Without U.S., there's no NATO. But after all these years, after Cold War, after the entry into a multipolar world, U.S. says it's enough. We don't want to be in the same extent anymore.
Yep.
We want to kind of pull out a little bit. It's too much already for us. We need to focus on China. We cannot be in as we has been, and also deal with China. It's stupid to do that. So we want to focus on Asia Pacific. We want to pull out of Europe at the same time to free up some resources. The Europeans, at least the elite, they don't want that. They still want the U.S. in. They want to be tense relation with Russia. So U.S. is saying, okay, why don't we have better relations with Russia, the Europeans, so we can pull out a little bit. So they want to play the moderation role between U.S. and Russia. That's what U.S. is right now in terms of Europe. And the recent Munich conference, this yearly conference, the Marco Rubio speech saying, actually, last year's same conference, J.D. Vance was criticizing Europe. They were knocking the European leadership for restricting the free speech along with other democratic human rights among the European population, because the U.S. sensed that European elite, they try to stay in the war with Russia in Ukraine, but the people is trying to move away from that, so they want to suppress the speech so they can stay in for longer. That's why J.D. Vance criticized European leadership for curtailing people's speech rights. But this year, Marco Rubio has a different tone. They were talking to the European leaders that he was talking to European leaders that we're in supporting you. Even he implying we want to restore European glory like the old days. But he didn't say, well, we agree with you on the Ukraine war. But
yeah, I think Rubio was like softer than J.D. Vance, but I still think it's along the same vein though as well, right? Like he still expressed like similar concerns to J.D. Vance, right?
True, but because he was softer, it went a long way
Sure.
among the Europeans. The host, he said, he actually literally, after Rubio finished his speech, he was sitting down for a conversation. One of the first things the host said, who was a European, the host country, I can't remember who that was German guy. He said, we all breathed a sigh of relief hearing you saying that. So they softened the tone, but I think the direction, like you said, is the same.
He's still in the same.
They want to pull out. They want to have
packaged it nicer.
Yeah, they want to settle the war with Russia so they can focus on China. Also, at the same time, better yet, if we can pull Russia away from China more to our side, that would be even better. So that's the position Europe is in this world with regard to the major powers.
So what do you see as the future of Europe with respect to trade flow with China, or with respect to, I guess the first question would be trade, and in general, relations?
Yeah, continue on that thought. From Chinese perspective, Europe is one of the poles. So we're in a multipolar world. I don't think U.S. thinks of Europe that way, but China has more respect for Europeans. They think they're one of the poles because it's an important place for China to do business. They already, in a lot of ways, actually in almost all ways, the trade between Europe and China is bigger, freer than between U.S. and China, because there's essentially no trade war between Europe and China, but there's no trade war between EU and China, but there's a trade war going on between U.S. and China. So a lot of Chinese products like EVs and other Chinese, more investment, technological exchange, and EV market is doing, Chinese products, EV products, doing better in European market than U.S. Essentially in the U.S. is zero, essentially zero.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe some electric buses in California is made in China, but other than that, it's essentially zero. But Europe, if you go to Europe, you'll see a totally different world. You could go to, like when it was Austria, they have billboards about Chinese product, Chinese cell phones, all this stuff. You don't see it here. So if you go to Europe with regard to Chinese economy or trade, you will feel like you're in a different world.
Interesting.
And of course, the Europeans, they try not to get involved in the military containment that U.S. is conducting against China. Like they have their fleet, their military bases around China, fleet are going near China's territorial waters. But Europeans, they're kicking and screaming doing that. Because just like this time in Hormuz, to opening up, U.S. try to pull Europe in. They try to advocate this notion of NATO should be in Asia as well. So the French, the Brits, they're kicking and screaming. They send a ship here just like a token. Okay, you want us to do it? Okay, we'll send a ship. Well, when they're going through Taiwan Strait, they turn on their radar. They turn on their radar. They do all kinds of gestures to cover their guns and something. Okay, we're coming. We're not sneaking up on you. We're not hostile. We're totally friendly. They do extra. They go out of their way to show, okay, we're here. We have to be here. We don't want to be here, but we're here. We're here to be as friendly as possible. So that's the military posture between the two countries. There's no military, essentially no military conflict, and there's no trade conflict as well. So if you go to Europe, their mentality is totally different from the U.S.
Could there be other reasons why the Europeans would be resistant to actions in the Straits of Hormuz, other than to avoid pissing off the Chinese?
I don't think the Hormuz has much to do with Chinese. They just want to, if you send ships, it's a very it's an implication. There's a lot of implication if you send military ship to there, right? Because it's a multifaceted. If something happens to that ship, if you're prime minister, send a warship to Hormuz, and something happens to it, how are you going to explain to your voters, right? They don't want that trouble. Number two, they've been piggyback. Trump is correct, saying you're the ones, your guys benefit directly from the opening up of Hormuz.
Yep.
So you should pitch in.
Yeah, pitch in.
You can't just say, oh, another free ride, ha ha ha.
Yeah.
That's Trump hate the most.
Yeah.
If you go to the national security strategy document, the most repeated thing is we want our allies also spend more and do more militarily.
Yeah.
So that's one of those things. So, but it's not nothing to do. But from the European standpoint, hey, you started a fire, you put it out. Don't drag us in. We didn't ask you to poke Iran, this hornet's nest. We didn't ask you to do that. You did it unilaterally. So now you want me to assume the political risk by sending our military there, even just one warship. What if something happens to it? What if Iran has a different military posture against us, which we don't ask for it. It's not to our not to our own any good for us. It's not in our interest to poke that hornet's nest. Now you want to pull us in, so we definitely resist on that. But it's nothing to do with China. Of course, China has disagreed. China will not send. Even Donald Trump singled out China and said China should send a ship too. Of course, China's not going to do that.
Yeah.
Because look at the relation with China between China and Iran. China hasn't done much. People will say China has done much to support Iran in this conflict, other than diplomacy. They voice their support or against the aggression in the United Nations. But China has done much other than that. Well, we don't know what's going on under the current, behind closed doors. We don't know what their effort is. So we don't know. But so this is a complex situation Europe doesn't want to get into, because they don't want to offend China unnecessarily, or offend Iran. It's not in their interest.
Could Europe also not be doing it because they have, larger migrant and Islamic populations that, are showing a lot of aggression internally?
Yeah, that's possible.
Could they fear retaliation from their own populations in a really bad way, like through terrorist attacks or something like that?
That's possible, but those migrants made from Arab countries, they don't like Iranians anyway. But they probably don't like Israelis either. So it's a complex situation, so that's also possible. So it's the European leaders have every reason not to do that, not to comply. They want to resist. I know the Brits sent a carrier group to Cyprus, just to make sure nothing will happen to their bases there, that sort of thing. They don't want to get into that, or very close to Hormuz. French has a probably carrier too, but they were like 1,000 miles away. Mm-hmm. So they're really resisting doing that.
Mm-hmm. So more broadly, what role do you think the Middle East plays in the U.S. and China's global strategies?
So initially, you see, that's another thing, different layers. U.S., at least what they're thinking in December, apparently on paper, they say we want to kind of pull out Middle East, because Middle East is not, the oil from Middle East is not critical to us anymore. On the contrary, we're developing our own energy hegemony, if you will. And we want to be an energy power. So at the same time, obviously, we're not relying on the Middle East. It's not important to us anymore. So also, we're happy about their effort, Middle Eastern countries, Gulf states, their effort in suppressing the terrorism. So it's time for us to work for at the same time. It was a mistake. Actually, it was previous U.S. mistake to be ideological about Middle East. There's a lot of Middle Eastern regimes. They think you're not democracy, so we'll go against you. We'll try to do a regime change, color revolution. They didn't say that, but they think we don't want to do ideology in the Middle East. So the many signs they want to retreat. They don't want to be as involved as it used to be. At the same time, we want to ensure Israel's security, and want to do certain things and try to ensure that, like peaceful ways. And so didn't see the Iranian thing coming from that document. But of course, from the different contexts, you can see signs that the 7 countries in 5 years, Iran is the last one in the early plans after in the 1990s. So you can see that coming, but it hasn't come until today. So the question is why today, right? So as we mentioned, the reasons why.
Okay. And last of all, the one part of the world we have not talked about yet is Africa. What role does Africa play in the US and China's global strategies?
Yeah, to the US it's kind of simple. Also it's about terrorism. US is, the administration expressed their kind of satisfaction with the effort, the anti-terrorism effort in Africa. So the US doesn't see an immediate threat or terrorist threat from Africa. More recently, they pulled out, along with French, the US along with the French pulled out of the Sahel, Sahel region, like Burkina Faso, that region. They pulled it out at the request of the local governments. So it doesn't look like US's plans to go back in. Actually, in the national security strategy, it says explicitly we want to avoid long-term involvement. We want to develop trade relations. That part you can say that really U.S. is probably just lip service, but I believe that's intention. Who doesn't want to develop trade?
Yeah, that's like
Trade relations,
yeah.
right? It's no-brainer, especially in terms of trade economy, technology. African countries not a challenge to the U.S. So, well, you haven't seen any action on that. The most important thing to the U.S. with regard to Africa is minerals, the natural resources, minerals. So they have an eye on that. They don't want to let China to have everything in Africa, although China has put in a lot of effort. But the U.S. doesn't want to just concede that. Also, it mentioned, which we haven't seen a lot of action, because the U.S. model of foreign aid is humanitarian aid.
Right, like is that like what everything that USAID was involved in?
Right, humanitarian aid, give you medicine, food, that sort of thing, disaster relief, that sort of thing, but not development or investment. China's the other way. China's what goes in for development, investment. Of course, it did disaster relief as well. That's why China, over the decades, won the hearts and minds of African countries. That's how China got into, PRC got into United Nations to replace the Republic of China, because they got enough votes from African countries. That's throughout the decades, China has fostered, cultivated the relations with your African countries. So more recently with the One Belt, One Road initiative, they focus on the investment, infrastructure and development of African countries, as opposed to the Western or the US model is just aid, like a handout.
So why do you think the approach is different? Because maybe, and I don't know the answer to this, but maybe if the idea is to just give aid, you say, okay, here's a boost, and now go do whatever it is that you want to do, that you think is best for yourself. Whereas maybe if you're trying to do more deep investment and development, you're going to have, in this case China's going to have a lot more say in how the country develops. So maybe it's also like a, I don't know if it's a moral issue, but it's an issue where like if you're developing an area more, like you're going to by default kind of just have much more influence over that.
Right, the multiple reasons. You said it. You have more influence because that's how you win the hearts and minds. People work with you to develop their own country, and your investment can relieve their unemployment. Initially, China made a mistake. They shipped their technology, their company, their capital, and their workers to work on the projects in Africa. And the local people, they were unhappy about it. They protested to their government. So China said, okay, we're going to stop that. We're going to hire local, although there's more challenge, cultural challenges, challenge and knowledge and stuff, but China do the best they can to do that. So with that kind of cooperation and give and take, you build the relationship. A lot of African kids, they speak Chinese. They have Chinese schools, Chinese classes.
But that's the thing, right? You're also shaping the relationship. There's I'm not sure how to word this, but maybe you're putting the local people on a path that they otherwise would not have wanted, right?
What's the alternative? Right?
I don't.
The alternative is Western model. You stay poor. Every time you need a handout, you may get a handout. You stay poor, you stay untrained. The country stay.
Yeah. No, I see what you're saying, and I see the merit to the Chinese model. It's just that the flip side of that is that if you don't just give someone a gift, right, which is kind of what the aid is, it's like, here's a gift for you, and hopefully now you can go and move on and live your life as you see fit. The moment you try to develop it, whether it's Americans doing it, French, Chinese, whoever, you're starting to shape that population in the image of the population giving the development.
See, that's the
and there's pros and cons to that.
That's the kind of Western mindset, or Western or American mindset. China is totally non-intervention. They will help you when you ask for it. So they don't come in and say, hey, we're gonna build a dam for you, or airport, or railway, or something. They came to China, and they worked out a deal. Usually oftentimes they went to Japan, US, maybe France or China, and more often than not, a Chinese company won the deal, signed the contract to start the development. And because China offered a better deal, and China's companies, especially, a lot of those companies are public owned, like a national company. It's called state-owned enterprises. They're not like the U.S. capitalism. They have to look at next quarter's profit report, or 5 years, you have to turn profit in 5 years. Chinese companies, especially those state-owned companies, they're not restrained by that. So they can look at long term, look at 10 years, 20 years, 50 years. They're not gonna give you a hard time if you can't repay them certain loans or can't service the loan. They're always very understanding. We can restructure the loan. They're not, because they themselves are not under the same pressure structurally, because it's a different system. So they have advantage over, let's say, Japanese company or U.S. bank. They can win the deal better. They can give a better deal.
It's a different financial structure, for sure.
So in practical matter, for the Africans, they would choose China. And China has more influence, but not in the same way that the U.S. will do. They don't intervene. Usually they came to China to say, oh, I want to learn more about how you develop, because China's always saying, you African brothers, we both under colonialism, we both suffer from that, we both coming from a very low place economically, so we want to develop our country. So now we made it, we have some accomplishment, and it's a big draw for the African leaders to say, if we can take a page from you, that would be great for us. So this all, of course, China wants to show their accomplishment, but it's the initiatives on the other side. They went to China, want to learn this, want to learn that. It's not China saying you have to have democracy. It's not China saying you have to have free market. Then we'll help you. That's usually that's the loan contingent to the loans from the Western world, especially the U.S. China does it entirely different way.
So what do they do?
So eventually, if China has more influence, so be it, because they like it this way. If they don't, I'm sure if they say, oh, China, we don't want to learn Chinese, we don't care about you, we just want to build a dam or the hospital or.
Would China be okay with that?
China would be okay with it. As Chinese, I say, the mentality, China would be okay with it. Totally. Because Usually it comes with a deal, like you Congo, cobalt. They have cobalt, okay? If Congo say you have no access to our cobalt mine, I'm sure China will mind, right? Because that's the thing they are after. Of course, long term, when you develop a country, African country, they're more, population more educated, more prosperous, they become your customer. Maybe you can have some kind of a trade, other kinds of cooperation with them. You don't want to cooperate with a ignorant person or poor person. There's nothing you can gain from them. They can contribute to the deal. But if someone, the other side is good, it's hopeful, they're up and coming, they're developing, that's someone you want to work with. It's not a moral issue, it's a practical issue from the Chinese standpoint. And of course, it's a very practical issue. It's a new industry, the battery industry, the AI technology. You need minerals, you need natural resources, and that Africa is rich in those things. So you want to build on your goodwill from the past, and do something more with the Build and Road initiative to help them develop, and they will let you access to their mines and stuff.
But doesn't that sound analogous to like what the U.S. did with China? They thought, okay, we'll start trading with you, and you'll become friendlier toward us. Like, why would the African, like, isn't that a bit of a contradiction? Like, maybe one day the African countries will become very powerful and become a threat to China.
Yeah, that's a big if, because that's not how China or even U.S. look at Africa. They can never be powerful like China versus in relation to U.S. So those are also, I don't think China is into that mentality like zero-sum mentality. China, they talk about it, and I believe they mean it. It's a win-win situation. If you do better, maybe if you really want to look at it that way, okay, I have all the market, now you can produce the same thing, I lose part of the market. I don't think China minds it. I think China look at a big picture. If you lose this market, that's fine. We can always move on to the higher level of the industry level. Like China has lost the textile to Vietnam for the most part.
But that's exactly the mentality the U.S. had, right? Like, oh, we can take away all of our industrial base, and people will just keep moving up the value chain, and that that's not the situation we're finding.
But China doesn't want to be out of the industrial base. China wants to remain the industrial manufacturing power of the world. China doesn't want to let go of that. For one thing, China saw the U.S. the lesson that U.S. is showing. They don't want to go on the same path to encounter the same problem. China is not U.S. They don't want to be U.S. They think their model at least is better for China. China understands saying our model is better than U.S. model. China thinks our model is better for China based on China's situation and their history and their population of people and their future. So they don't look at it the same way. And if the African country becomes stronger, China has a way to work with them that will benefit China as well, because they really believe in a win-win situation.
Okay. Well, I think we've gone all around the world. Do you have any other comments or anything else you'd like to discuss that we haven't already discussed?
Yeah, I think this time over, people call it a hybrid war between the U.S. and China. Like from the U.S. perspective, it may not be a war. We just want to contain China so that we can still be the number one of the world. We don't call it a war. Although in U.S. terminology, there are a lot of wars. War on drug, war on this, war on that. But for the real war, they don't call it a war. They don't call it the conflict with Iran a war, or Venezuela for that matter. So they talk about war not as war, or not war as war, right? But from their standpoint, it's totally normal. I'm kind of convinced of that. What we do is totally normal. It's nothing personal. It's business. But from China's standpoint, right, this is civilizational difference, right? we bear no ill will against you. In history, China and US relations have always been good. Although US, when the Brits were selling drugs to China, opium, US was doing that too, the Kennedy family. But all in all, the relation has been good. Historically, even the US, the name the US, Mei Guo, Mei means beautiful. What other countries in Chinese vocabulary has a beautiful name like that? So also today, when I go to China, right, people think, oh, they're from the United States, although I'm Chinese, right? I can sense they bear no ill will against the United States, especially the average people on the street. So the rest is the civilizational difference, different mindset. China says, oh, you're hostile to us. US says, well, it's just business. So I think maybe when it comes to trust, militarily, maybe we shouldn't trust each other, right? Because military you can have one blow, have tremendous damage. But as far as war, as far as trade, you can do wait and see. But for wait and see, we can trade. We don't have to cut the globalization. We can cooperate for each other's better goods. But for critical areas like AI, if the other side wins the AI competition, they set the standards, they will have tremendous long-term implication on us. Because if you set the standard for the world, then you will leave me in the dust, by the dust, so to speak. So that part, short of the critical strategic areas, US and China can totally work with each other. Trust has very little to do with it. But actually in the US strategy, it also says in the critical strategic areas, we want to do it in one way, cut off decouple. Let's face it. They want to decouple on the strategic areas, but they want to continue the free trade in other areas. So I think it's a good one. It's a good direction, but in the mindset it's a little different. Right? One side it's normal, the other side it's uncalled for. We don't want to be part of it. So it's an understanding the gap needs to be bridged, more so than the previous conflicts among the Western civilization, those different states. Now we're going global at different civilizations. It's a different world.
That's for sure. So with that, any parting comments?
That's all. I hope the best for both countries, because I'm in the U.S. Everything I have is in here, but my heart, my attention is a lot of it is in China. So I certainly want the best for both worlds, and if the two countries make the good decisions, behave better, I'm sure the rest of the world will benefit too. That's a good scenario for the future. Of course, we have other scenarios that other people will look at.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.